In the Middle East, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is keeping up his push for a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, but serious obstacles remain. On Tuesday, Blinken held talks in Egypt on the proposed truce before traveling to Qatar. Both countries, along with the U.S., are acting as mediators. On Monday, Blinken told journalists in Tel Aviv that Israel had accepted what he called a bridging proposal designed to address the differences between the two sides. But Hamas, the militant group that committed the October 7th terror attacks, says that proposal goes against what it had previously agreed to. Bring in Laura Blumenfeld. She's a best-selling author and Middle East analyst at Johns Hopkins University. Laura, welcome back to the day. Now, you served in the U.S. State Department as senior policy advisor for the peace process in the Middle East. What would be your advice for Antony Blinken today as he's in the region trying to broker a ceasefire deal?
Well, I would say there are the ceasefire 3 T's for success. Number 1, timing. Number 2, trust. And number 3, tough, an ability to get tough. First of all, with the timing, I mean, I happened to be in Secretary Kerry's office in 2014 during a Gaza war when the Israeli tanks just rolled over the border into Gaza. And his first instinct, Secretary Kerry, was let's go for a ceasefire. The truth was then, and perhaps now, is that neither side was ready for that. And as much as we pushed and tried, not only was Israel not ready to lay down their arms, but Egypt as well, that was helping broker in 2014, felt like that there needed to be a little bit more of fighting before we could reach that ceasefire. So number 1, timing. The second thing is trust. Secretary Kissinger said one time that trust is the currency of diplomacy. There's very little trust right now. We're seeing actually a degradation of that. Unfortunately, we're going in the wrong directions. Hamas today said that they are, increasingly suspicious of the United States, that America is siding too much on the Israeli side. So unfortunately, that's not looking good. The third thing is tough, an ability to sort of get tough, depending on, which party is the recalcitrant one. Madeleine Albright, a former Secretary of State, was very good about being tough in terms of keeping the negotiations quiet and private. I think one of the problems we're seeing today is it's all being played out in public, and with all the leaks in the media, that makes it very, very hard for the negotiators and the parties to make concessions and save face. Secretary Albright used to say to the press when they would ask her about negotiations with Syria and Israel, she would say mushrooms. And what she meant by mushrooms was that negotiations, especially when it comes to treaties, are just like mushrooms. They do better in the dark.
Mm-hmm. It from what we know and from what you're saying, it seems like we know a lot of what is being talked about there. It does seem like it's one step forward and one back. When Israel is on board, Hamas is not, and vice versa. Is that really so? Or is there progress being made that maybe isn't being conveyed as such?
Well, there is progress. The problem is those last few percentages or yards, if you want to use the football analogy that the Americans have been using, are always the hardest, right? That's always those final details sometimes are the stickiest. And they can actually stick so hard that it blows up a deal. Again, that happened to us in 2014. We hit a kind of detail about a prisoner release, actually, and the sides couldn't agree on it. And that then we were, the whole thing unraveled. And a few months later, there was a war. I think right now what we're seeing is a kind of diplomatic holding pattern. We're circling. Are we going to run out of fuel? Hamas is accusing the Americans of playing for time. And the question is, can we land the deal before the really big problem comes about, which is Iran and Hezbollah are poised to retaliate against Israel, which hopefully, in the best case scenario, will motivate the sides and to compromise rather than lead to a regional conflagration, which is our number one priority from the beginning of this terrible 10 months for the United States. Number one priority has been avoiding regional escalation.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Iran because there's a lot to unpack here. A ceasefire was billed by many as a way of keeping Tehran at bay when it comes to avenging the killing of Hamas political chief on its soil. But an Iranian foreign ministry spokesman gave an interesting statement in that regard. Let's quickly listen in and then get back to you.
The issue of the Gaza ceasefire has nothing to do with Iran's legitimate and legal right to punish the aggressor, and it will not relate directly to it. We are not looking for intensification of insecurity in the region. We support efforts with good intentions regarding the ceasefire.
Laura, what do you make of that statement?
Well, I think it's important for Iran to put that statement forward because the West is telling them to stand down, but they still have the need to save face. Iran is playing a long game here. They're absolutely right when they say one thing isn't connected to the other. I mean, there's a clock in Palestine Square in Tehran, which is ticking down backward. It's a doomsday clock for Israel that by 2040, Iran will eliminate the state of Israel. So you have to understand in the larger context of what their goals are. It's also important to understand the weapons that the United States has poised, whether it's at Iran's proxies or whether it's at the regime itself, whether it's the supreme leader, is the gun pointed at his head, or is that their proxies? I think that could make a big difference if they understood whether the American firepower that they're rushing to the region, whether it's the battleships or the fighter jets, is that aimed at Iran? What is the U.S.-Iran policy here? I think that there's been a lot of discussion of that. Is it tough enough? Is it too tough? We're in the middle of a presidential race, so it's kind of a hard time to start debating foreign policy and acting on it. But I think that really goes to the core of the issue here. Where is the United States with Iran? And that's what Netanyahu was arguing for when he spoke in front of Congress several weeks ago. He said to the American people and Congress, our fight is your fight. The question is it really?
Yeah. I want to pick up on something that Antony Blinken said when he arrived in Israel on Monday. He said this was the best and perhaps the last chance to get a deal over the line. What happens if that doesn't happen?
Well, I think it was very interesting, and thank you for quoting that, because he was hedging, right? He said maybe the best and perhaps the last. Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir said years ago, never give yourself an ultimatum because you box yourself in, right? Americans are always the optimists. And so there will be another time and another time. The reason why this is very different, though, again, is because nothing quite focuses the mind like a gun to your head. And Israel truly does have a gun to its head right now, with this potential twin assassinations that they conducted in the past few weeks, with the potential retaliation for that, both coming from the north and from the east, from Iran. So it is a little bit different. The stakes are much higher. And sometimes when the stakes are so high, you can say it's too big to fail, this diplomacy. Watch the skies is what I would say. Look, the lights are going down. The sun is setting over the Middle East now. Watch the skies, not only for whether there'll be rockets and increased, drone strikes, but also for the aircraft. I mean, for the first time since October, Fly Dubai, the Emirates airline, is grounding their aircraft at night. That does give me some concern.
As Laura Blumenfeld, author and Middle East analyst, thank you so much for all those fascinating insights. It's always great speaking to you.